The word aromatic fougère it's probably one of the least transparent namings for a perfume genre. Blame the French. That, you know what, you either like it or you're not. Like, I don't need to know all of these 50 categories and know what fougère or Chypre is in order to know if I find a perfume sexy. Fair. And the true nature of things that we consume, either through sniffing, eating, drinking, seeing, hearing, still will need decoding. It will still need some form of a language. Mark my word, the word perception is the word of the year and probably the next 3 years. Trying to understand not necessarily how things are, but what are the maps and ontologies of how we perceive them. Hi, Perfume Nation. Today we're gonna try to cultivate some level-headedness in the way that we perceive scents, specifically in the fragrance and perfume world. And if you think that the title of this podcast is a bit too familiar, or you feel like, oh, I know this already, prepare yourself to re-examine what you think you know. The issue of classifications of any area of our lives, including the world of scents, is not necessarily that the ontologies that we come up with are ironclad and set in stone, but it is more that the question is worth asking rather than the answers are worth preserving. The truth of the matter is, olfactive world is rapidly changing. It has been changing for at least a century and shows no signs of stopping for a whole variety of issues. Climate change, not the least of them at this time. And when we're talking about smells, it's the sense of smell is the oldest signaling sensory mechanism that is available to us and to other animals. Even bacteria can do that. Hearing, vision, all of that other wonderful stuff, beside maybe tactile. All of the other senses came much after. The chemical sensing was around, specifically talking about olfaction. Therefore, super ancient, fairly convoluted, and in some ways questionably rudimentary. And this is important to mention because I think it's often gets swept under the rug and we jump into the more interesting, more fancy pastures, try to explore a more cerebral type of aspects or more emotional aspects when it comes to fragrance design. However, it's important to note that any perfume or fragrance is designed for a human nose. Therefore, knowing at least the basics of how we process and how we perceive smells, it's super duper important. It also one of the biggest predictors of our health. It really dramatically affects our mental health as well. So, a few things to note: that as most sensory systems, olfactive, the sense of smell, is designed to detect change. Anything monotonous, super loud or super faint is not good for our nose. Things that are super faint, it's not gonna detect. Things that are very loud, high concentrations, or very let's say irritating, very much triggering for our nose, are more than likely first to be perceived as stink, as something unpleasant. Loud smells, no matter what we smell like, we perceive as stink, unpleasant, irritating, annoying, headache inducing, almost without exclusions, really, regardless of what are we smelling. And second, there are systems in our body that are removing aroma chemicals from the mucus and from the sensing receptors. Almost as soon as we start triggering the response, smelling something, these systems turn on and start removing those things from the environment to set it back to zero. So olfaction fatigue is very real, and anything that we would find delightful has to be very finely tuned to be just so. It has to be changeable, dynamic in space and time. It has to be not too loud, not too quiet, which does vary dramatically between people. Not maybe so dramatically, but quite a lot. And it has to not be associated with very particular type of aroma chemicals that we perceive as dangerous. So even, I would dare say, smoky leathers are not necessarily relaxing for most people, because the smell of smoke or sulfur or some other components that exist on Earth to us is a trigger response of danger, and therefore we just cannot enjoy them truly. That said, there is a lot that changed in the way that our brain makes decisions with acquisition of hearing and vision. It seems that in the moment of the decision making, we are most guided by what we see, then what we hear, and then everything else. With, as I said, the exception of certain very potent stinky smells that we consider to be, brain considers to be an immediate danger to our breathing, to our health. Vision and hearing dominates in the moment, in the decision making. And what we smell often can be coached and changed using visual and hearing cues. Therefore, what we think we smell can change instantly with the incorporation of context. Olfaction is only one known sense that we have that has a very high success rate of zero-shot learning or one-shot learning. So you're given one example that is accompanied by a strong emotional, often negative, emotional benchmark, some experience, and from then on we will forever recognize that smell with that emotion. But as I said, it's malleable. You can teach it one way, you can teach it the other way. Interestingly, we can learn to love or to hate certain fragrant compositions and scent compositions if we're giving an appropriate cultural or emotional, especially emotional context to that experience. And that was what creates this very delectable challenge for perfume making world. Because we want things to be very calibrated. Our nose needs it just so, not too loud, not too quiet, not dynamic enough, so there is something we can sniff through. We are really loaded with context. We can love or hate the same scent depending on cultural, emotional context. We are really struggling distinguishing, comparing two scents unless they are like right given in front of us. So our ability to recall details of any given fragrance is actually pretty bad. But what I said about memory still stands. A certain scent profile can be encoded with 0 to 1 shot learning for good, for life, depending again on the context. So we can be transported into emotion, into any learned context by a scent very reliably, very quickly. And yet if somebody asks us to distinguish two types of rose scents, we can fail miserably. Or sometimes even distinguishing rose from, I don't know, from chamomile or jasmine or something else. It actually requires training. And I find this contradiction quite yummy, delectable, as I said. Isn't that so yummy? The fact that the olfactive sense of smell is one of the best primers for us to go through life. And yet, we're pretty bad at detecting and distinguishing scents forefront. So they are really powerful contexts for us to remember, but we don't necessarily can decompose and remember them very easily without fairly long amount of training. It is said that to become a master perfumer, you need 20 years of daily training and practice, recognizing, combining, and analyzing combinations of different aroma chemicals. And with that, let me introduce you to what is known to date on classifications of perfumes. Specifically, we're talking about any scent that we find pleasant. That is the big separation of the world of fragrance and flavors from the rest of the olfaction science and arts world, because that can combine any type of scents, including the ones that, in biohazards or bioweapons, things that we find repulsive. The world of fragrance and flavors is a professional, multi-billion-dollar industry solely focuses and has been focusing for several centuries now on finding, identifying, studying, and designing scents that we find appealing, that we find evocative in a positive way, this or that way, across cultures, across times, across all variations in our noses and our brains and our context, which is, for better and for worse, is key in the way we fall in love with perfumes. Here is the biggest mystery hiding in plain sight. The fragrance and flavor industry does not have a scientifically proven, ironclad, justified, working without a failure system of classifying odors. There are dozens upon dozens of variants, and almost every big manufacturer of fragrance materials or fragrances themselves, a lot of startups are now interested in that area, trying to use machine learning to create odor maps. Osmo AI, to mention one, we just recently had an interview and talked about it at some length. Almost each master perfumer, that means a trained chemist who is also a designer of olfactory profiles and olfactory art pieces, for many years, each of them have their own classification system that helps them to organize their mental map and train their brain and reproducibly recognize and combine different odors in the most beneficial and unique for them ways. It's almost a country without a constitution. And one of the issues why it is so difficult is, again, how olfaction works. So ancient, so context dependent, has immediate links to the limbic system and memory parts of the brain, and yet is very reductionist-like. So we have about 300 types of receptors that can bind to any number of odorants. It's probably the order of billions of different type of odorants that these receptors can process. There is some specification what type of receptor is, what type of molecules it's processing, whether it's dirty, it's very fuzzy, there's no real clean distinction, and sometimes different types of receptors by the same type of molecule or the same type of molecule can actually produce a very different odor sensation. It's very muddy. It's many to many at the sensing, the low sensing layer, when aroma chemical, the fragrance molecules bind to the receptors, and they do not start signaling. The second stage of information analysis, and that already happens in the brain and olfactory bulb, is this odd and not super well understood reductionism. We actually take all of this many on many complexity, and it reduces and recomputes it in these small little pouches and reduces it to almost very few components. And then after doing that much collapsing of the richness of information to a rather primitive synthesized summary response, it shoots it straight to the limbic system, right? It's pretty drastic. the dramatic reduction of complexity that happens as a pre-stage, constant work of all these systems to remove smelling, to remove triggering of the receptors. And then once it comes up with some rather primitive, considering other types of sensory mechanisms and complexity of signaling pathways, it's a rather primitive message sending, but it sends it right to the place in our brain that can overshadow and override the rest of the cognitive functions. So it's really bizarre in the way how simplistic yet powerful it is. And again, it becomes simple, we presume by necessity through the evolutionary reasons, from a rather incountable infinity of possibilities of what can bind to what and how. So the world of perfumery lives in this black box where they focus on the initial stage, right? What molecule can I make, jumping straight to the result. What is the result? What are you experiencing in your self-described universe of feelings, emotions, thoughts, whatever you can put in words, essentially. So going through many rounds and many stages of technological development, the perfume classification systems are becoming more and more complex. And yet, I think before we break the rules and throw this all away and say, oh, it's so difficult, it's complicated, let's at least review what a few centuries of really hard work gave us in terms of at least a departing point before we become rebels for no cause. One of the famous series of books, it was just glossary or a catalog, if you wish, of notable famous perfumes in which perfume families, perfume classification they belong to, is Michael Edmond's book that's called Fragrances of the World. They stopped printing it a while ago because it just became intractable as the production exploded of pretty much all consumer goods, including perfumes. There are too many perfumes that are being produced for a catalog like this exists and make any practical sense. However, one thing, if you can find a used one and you're just curious, it's a cool thing to flip through. It gives you a very short description of a fragrance family according to the Michael Edwards, and a few words about him. Why do we care about what he has to say? Michael Edwards was one of the founding fathers, as he's usually called, of perfume marketing, the way that the sale reps are trained to talk about perfumes, show perfumes, introduce people for perfumes on the ground when people come to a department store or to a specialized perfume boutique. So he worked very hard for, I think, since the late 70s, definitely through the 80s. He became famous for his perfume wheel. And this, what I propose we take a look at, because this is probably one of the perfume wheels that are most famous in the training or any classes that you might, or webinars that you might take. So it's super famous. I'm not telling you anything proprietary secret. And since its inception in the 80s, it has become pretty much the lay of the land. A lot of these words will be already familiar to you. Oddly enough, I've looked at it many times and I forever get surprised why is in the center of the pyramid we get aromatic fougères. Maybe this is a tribute to the fact that fougère, again, a new foreign name that I'll explain in a minute, aromatic fougères, because they were one of the core breakthroughs beyond the coumarin, and before that there was just essential oils. And in the world of professional perfumery, mixing essential oils is not considered to be perfume making because it lacks a lot of necessary qualities what makes a fragrant liquid a perfume. So the perfumes as an art arguably have started with invention of synthetic molecules or new processes of purifying natural ingredients into these highly isolated, very specific compounds that had strong, powerful, detectable, memorable characteristics. So coumarin is one of them. Aromatic fougères, according to Michael, are in the center. And those are anything that makes you think of your grandpa's eau de cologne. So they give impressions of something potentially green, but not necessarily light. They often contain notes of lavender, some green or piney thing, potentially some citruses, and again, the mere name eau de cologne was actually used to be a name of a fragrance that was developed in a certain part of Italy that contained a lot of these components, and it was so popular and so well received that it became its own genre and lost its named entity status, and now we call it just colognes. Well, we're making reference to the original aromatic fougères. By the way, the word aromatic fougère it's probably one of the least transparent namings for a perfume genre. Blame the French. However, the word aromatic is really confusing because we're talking about aromatic substances. What do you mean when the scent is aromatic? Just to decode it real quick, it usually means that when you breathe it in, it gives you this lung opening effect. Similar, if you ever had a vapor bath, when you make herbal teas or any boiling hot mixtures that exude a lot of these herbaceous type of scents, that is what's considered aromatic. Dry herbs, all kinds of green, botanical type of smells that are not overtly a flower that you recognize. The next situation is actually fairly easy to trace. We have, going in the sectors, floral notes from here, we have oriental notes, we have woody notes, we have fresh notes. The thing is that this survived fairly well, this classification, till about early 2000s, when there was yet another technological explosion of not only different type of aroma chemicals, specific new molecules that gave us new scents that we had no reference in nature for, and therefore we needed to develop almost new language how to describe them. Fresh, probably marine notes is as a testament in this classification of Michael Edwards to the 90s when oceanic perfumes were invented. Interestingly enough, full circle later, 2025, now we have a new generation of oceanic notes that are actually naturalistic like depictions of what you smell, the breeze that you smell when you're at the Mediterranean Sea or the ocean side or on a tropical vacation. And those are not the same as Davidoff Cool Water, which was essentially this hard to describe because this is a synthetic molecule, doesn't exist in nature. These fresh feeling, a refreshing light feeling with often somewhat of a fruity type of undertone. And that was called oceanic at the time. Now we call it marine, and oceanic and mineral notes that are very popular now, and we have them with many perfumes. For example, what can you find everywhere? Tom Ford Costa Azura. That would be an example of a contemporary oceanic perfume. We call them seaweed, oceanic, mineral, and we have to call the whole cohort of oceanic perfumes from the 90s and early 2000s. Now they're called marine, just because we have to separate things somehow. And that's why a lot of these pyramids or wheels start breaking down, because as the more we invent of new scents and smells that never existed before, that we never had before, we need to invent the language that describes them, that we can share this information. And if I say marine, I'm talking about the early fresh oceanic, airy, ozonic type of perfumes. And if I say mineral oceanic, we're talking about contemporary salty, reclaimed mood, seaweedy type of combinations. The more we have that, imagine now the possibilities of juxtaposing all these aromatic ingredients together into the bouquets explodes. It's a factorial explosion of how many new scents we can produce. However, do not despair. I find that classifications like that, and we'll go today through 3 major, super duper reliable, old school, made in stone classifications that you can always fall back on if you get overwhelmed. But I have to caveat that by saying that we live in the world of plenty. We live in the world of new, novel, never seen before combinations of factors in product design, including fragrances, that you can't bury yourself and nail yourself to these wheels. Okay, fresh notes, it's pretty much super old citrusy. As I said, Italian eau de cologne, that would be it. If you feel like you smell lime, citruses, bergamot oil goes the same way. We also have green leaves and grass, which is somewhat different from aromatic fougère, which is very old school version of that. Now we can make actually naturalistic smelling, very true to the form, watery, wet, fresh, bitter, refreshing, freshly cut grass scents, which was not available over a century ago to no one. And the fresh notes pretty much include that: fresh green, fresh cut grass, somewhat watery, citrusy, yellow, sunny, sour, acidic, and a vast majority of marine notes. As you can see here, everything, pretty much 2 decades of mineral oceanic development of fragrances is collapsed into just one little blue circle here. And this is the version from 2003. And that explains a lot. You can easily just open a new fractal here, because there's a whole world of perfumes, not to even mention Baccarat Rouge, which is its own version of Gourmands. Talking of Gourmands, let's slowly make our way to them. As we start exploring, so like this blue little circle, obviously he couldn't possibly have known it in 2002. Imagine that this is a portal to another dimension with a whole another classification of fragrances exists. However, by this logic, we start adding more and more herbaceous notes. So we add some floral notes and we get our fresh cut flowers. There are enough flowers that actually don't have this fruity, sweet, floral, imaginative, romantic scent. A lot of them actually can give you this zesty, bitter, maybe aniseed almost type of a feel. I think tulips and daffodils, narcissus, are really 2 good examples. But then we can go to maybe, that was a big surprise to me, but that's how the marketing saw fragrances transitions from purely florals, and then we can think of headier florals, jasmine, rose, the florals that we know, through to softer florals. And that will forever intrigue me, because they classify soft floral subcategory as adding aldehydes and powder notes. Powder notes I get, think Kinzo flower, and those subtle, somewhat milky souffle, freesia maybe, these soft, nuanced florals. Lilacs can be this way. But aldehydes, again, maybe this is more designed for the generation of Chanel number 5 lovers, because nobody Gen X and younger that I know of classifies aldehydic perfumes as soft. That's just not a thing. Aldehydic perfumes, all to my nose, have these prickly, almost shocking, a little bit of a presence. They are very potent. There are many ways aldehyde as a family of aroma chemicals can actually have quite a varying type of scents. But what we mean when we say, oh, there are aldehydes in this perfume, is this either oily, somewhat dated, that's a lot, as a lot of people perceive them now, this Chanel number 5 presence, or Approche by Lanvin and other classical aldehydic perfumes, or Lily of the Valley light, somewhat metallic, dry, almost like a shard of glass thrown into the perfume composition, those light airy aldehydes that almost it's scratching a glass type of a feel. They're not as oily, they're not as heavy, they're not as dominant. They just give they elevate the composition while keeping it somewhat insistent. Then we start finally with slowly making our way to sweet, fruity spices. So these are orange flowers. Rose is actually considered to be a fruity type of a floral. There are hundreds of types of different roses, but there are only few that can be produced on the mass scale. So you need so many, like 4 tons of rose petals in order to make 1 kilogram of essential oil. Like, it's a very non-eco-friendly, non-sustainable type of operation to deal with naturals, which is a bit of another yet less delectable, more painful controversy that exists in the world of naturals. Naturals are actually not eco-friendly and not sustainable, because you need to destroy a lot of ecosystems and a lot of real flowers in order to get just a little bit of that essential oil substance. Roses, pretty much all florals, all of them contain a rich mixture of different type of flavors, aroma chemicals, and they can be extracted, separated, and manipulated in different ways to reproduce a very rich variety of scents. This is why jasmine and rose are considered to be the queens of the floral category, because almost any scent can be reproduced with components extracted from their essences of what the flowers produce in general. But we're getting closer and closer to spices. Actually, lilies, certain types of lilies are considered spicy florals. And if you've ever smelled rich, dense lily scent, the flowers, you will notice how animalic and spicy they can be. So we're transitioning to floral oriental. That's probably one of my favorite categories. I like things to be intersectional. If the perfume is straightforwardly spicy sweet, it's pleasant always, but it's boring. But when there is a little bit of a departure somewhere, there's a little bit of a juxtaposition against some other note, I find it just unbelievably satisfying and intriguing to study. And then we're going to classical gourmands. That is incense, amber. By the way, amber is not a natural ingredient. It's an accord that existed for centuries. It combines vanilla with labdanum, which both can be of natural origin. However, the what we consider amber scent, this, I don't want to say honey-like, because honey has its own smell. What people say they feel as amber, true amber. True amber is a cultural phenomenon, same as leather scent. That's a cultural phenomenon. I actually made a 2-part series on leather if you want to learn more about what's that about and how it came about and what really makes a leather sense and what are the best ones on the market. I'll leave a link below. You can find it on my channel. Anyway, amber with spices, incense. Incense too is a composite idea. The way that we make incense in different cultures, it's quite a few ingredients. There's frankincense, there's myrrh, there are a lot of other spices that can be added to create the incense accord in a given church or a given temple or any given cultural context. But that places us at soft Oriental. So you have very finely milled, delicate spices with the sweetness. Then we're going straight to the full Oriental. So here we're missing the modern gourmand category that exists now. And that's where you would probably place Baccarat Rouge and such. And Alien by Mugler and those edible, La Vie Belle by Lancôme, edible, syrupy, sugary gourmands. So those would probably, I imagine, go here. But Oriental, it's when we add more musks and vanilla. I guess, again, surprisingly to me, all gourmands, according to Michael Edwards, live in the Oriental category. Agree to disagree? I think gourmands, it's just, again, all the categories, all the topologies or let's say ontologies of any system are designed for with only one goal in mind: to simplify our navigation and communication about that world. They are by necessity are simplified representations of complexity of the real world, but they have to be functional. I don't find it functional to call gourmands Orientals, not at all. But again, this is what gave birth to the world of perfumes and their classifications as we know them now. Then, and again, as a wheel, it actually makes a lot of sense. You see, you almost can do it yourself perfume making by going from one ingredient to another and trying to combine them together. If you can, there are places you can buy actually modern perfume ingredients and play with that. So musks, vanilla, all kinds of resins, all kinds of these comforting, heavy but comforting scents, they all live here. We're slowly but surely moving toward woods and Chypres. Now, Chypre, yet another French genre of perfumery, very, very old, pretty much has to contain certain ingredients to be called a Chypre. Patchouli and or oak moss. They give often this bitter, sour, heavier type of a base. And they're in a good Chypre, you always combine it with a contrasting note. That's why it really gets me with Chloé Nomade and some other, or like Libra, Yves Saint Laurent are called neo Chypres. When something is sweet, it no longer has any traces of any contrast of sour sweet, sour bitter, sour green, sour smoky. It's no longer a Chypre in my book. The most characteristic, typical thing where people fall in love with Chypres. It's similar as falling in love with olives. I used to absolutely abhor olives when I was a kid. I could not understand why adults wanted to put that bitter, salty, sour shit in their mouths. But without an exception, everybody who started exploring the world of scents goes through a season of obsession with various Chypres, because they are a very characteristic and interesting category. So as I said, Michael specifically tries to stay away from somewhat antiquated and spotty, randomized terminology that we inherited from the alchemy days, essentially, when perfumers were doctors, chemists, alchemists, and philosophers all in one. into something that somewhat easier to understand. So that's why you see a lot of repetition of terms. Soft Oriental, floral Oriental, woody Oriental, and mossy woods, which we are going toward now. So woody Orientals, and and I presume mossy Orientals, it's when you start adding these bitter sour essences that originally used to be produced by original patchouli and moss. As I said, natural ingredients are not eco-friendly and not sustainable. Therefore, most moss type of accords that you will find now in mass-produced perfumery are produced through commercial chemical plants, because certain types of moss almost went extinct, or maybe did go extinct, some of them, because of the perfume making. It's a very unsustainable industry to put scent on yourself. So in that sense, the fact that we have all these chemical plants and all these fairly technologically intense processes of how get the same molecule that you'll find in essential oil, patchouli oil, how to get that same molecule, let's say like 5-7 essential molecules that make patchouli smell what it smells like, how to get them from other sources, often from residuals of other technological processes to make it recycled chain. There are many examples of that. Anyway, patchouli and moss, you can still get an essential oil just to get a whiff of it. It makes them interesting. Some people like them as they are. It's a very hippie thing to do. It's a very earthy. Some people say it makes them think of touching wet black soil almost. It's very earthy, heavy feel. And they work the best when they're combined as what's called Chypre with some floaty note. It can be a floral classic Chypres, and I have one here, for example, Cartier Panther, and I have Perfume version, because this is softer, more to my nose, a little bit more well-rounded version of this fragrance design. Peachy, fruity notes, that the most classical Chypres on earth. Something sour, bitter, green, earthy, and you add these delectable peach preserves on top of it. Addictive stuff. Okay, now that we know where we are with woody Orientals and mossy woods, to enhance that feel of zestiness and sourness, you will start adding citruses to the mix, right? Bergamots, you name it. There are a lot of bitter orange essences. A lot of things can really bring that delicious sour bitterness that people, let's say, love in all kinds of olives or wines to that end. You can bring that in the olfactory design as well. And dry woods, and that's pretty much the end in this classification. We made it all the way through the citruses, fresh perfumes, florals, Orientals, spicy Orientals, which is like gourmands here in between, anything that gives you this earthy petricolor, the smell of soil would probably go here. And the last one is dry woods. So this classification by Michael Edwards has been pretty much the status quo for 30 years, if not longer. And if you thought we're done, finally we know everything there's to be known about the world of perfumes and how they differ, I want to just contrast the marketing perspective. So this is legit how the industry has been training its best salespeople and marketing people to understand and talk about perfuming. All right, it's a really good anchor point. We're not denying its historical significance, but look how master perfumers are actually understanding the world of perfumes and how they see them differ, and what they see are the quintessential types of fragrances that you need to know, understand, and distinguish, and find your favorites in each category. So here we have Edmond Roudnitska, one of the founding fathers of perfume schools in general, a legendary master perfumer, a person who shaped a lot of genres in perfumery in 20th century. Sometimes it's just hard to find any educational texts by these master perfumers because first, a lot of them were deeply buried in the industrial complex of the business itself, and were not necessarily as well known and regarded and had the resources and freedoms to talk and publish as, let's say, book authors can do. The perfumers are more and more through the years are recognized as authors of olfactory artworks rather than just chemists who mix them in little vials. Similarly, as an author of literature is not just a typist who types words on the page, but it's a lengthy process. And the world of perfumery, the industry, is riddled with all kinds of NDAs, copyrights, and this secrecy, a very jealous secrecy that pierces through the whole professional industry. And the way that the profits are generated are through secrecy. So it's a non-trivial thing to find any genuine descriptive text by a master perfumer that actually contains necessary details. However, Edmond Roudnitska was there, one of the first in terms of the printed world and when things were becoming more circulated. So we have some texts by him when he talks about how to teach people. He specifically geared new perfumers. Let's steal that. Best of the best teaching the best. So he says that there are 15 different series of studying and blind testing that you need to design for yourself if you want to understand perfumes. And those have to be executed in order, because he thought long and hard for many years about what's best way to train your brain to recognize and remember and distinguish specific type of odors. He divided them into 15 series, and he designed a curriculum so that the teaching of your brain has to be done in specific order with the increasing complexity. First is citrus. I think no-brainer. Probably the most accessible in its native form to most people on the planet. For this or that way, most of us have smelled something citrusy. So that's the first series. He says pick up 30, that's a lot, 30 different ingredients. Well, for perfume making, if you're a perfume connoisseur or aspire to be, 30 different perfumes of different citruses in nature, and study them extensively. Next is rose. As we discussed before, jasmine and rose are like two floral queens in perfumery, because almost anything can be constructed, reconstructed, and deconstructed using components that those two family of flowers produce. Next, orange flower. Interestingly, that he considers orange flower to be more complex than rose. We have citrus, rose, orange flower, and then jasmine. He sees a difference, a categorical difference. Mind you, 15 series for everything. Edmond Roudnitska divided the whole world of perfume, scents, ingredients into 15 things, and he divided orange flower from jasmine. Is that important? Next, violet/iris. That surprised me, and then I started digging deeper into the component chemistry, and apparently iris, which we don't use flowers, we use roots, and they are fermented, and there's a whole very lengthy process of producing the butter that then gives us the scent of iris. Violets and iris do contain similar chemicals and can be easily confused in a fragrance. Ask me how I know. Next one in increasing complexity for us to teach ourselves anise. Anise, like it is your mimosa, and I guess anise itself. Green florals also can be called anise-like. There's your mimosas, tulips, daffodils, and anise itself, and many other things. Next, herbal, but then, next is green. Edmond Roudnitska saw a dramatic difference, categorical difference between when something smells green and when it's herbal. And to me, it makes sense because there are a lot of dried herbs that do not give me the green feel. They give me, as we discussed, this mysterious word aromatic. It's like wet sauna maybe feel when you're just breathing in just richness of clearly botanical, but not fresh, but not green type of sense. And you can't call it necessarily spicy because spices that we use in the kitchen have their own presence. Black pepper or cinnamon or cardamom, right? Herbal is its own category and it's separate from green. Herbal, green, then we have spice. That probably would be my favorite category. Spice, all kinds of spices. There are probably at least 5 types of peppers and pepper oils that exist in the perfume world. Then, and I'm surprised it's so high on the list on complexity, but note, spice, then woody. Woody, because if you look at the ingredients, there is a difference between the complexity of the sense in the outside world, and depending on which continent you're on, which climate, and how green the areas are around you, you might encounter many different smells, woody smells, and think, like, yeah, there are so many woods and they're all so different. But in reality, in the production of woody components, there are probably 5. There's definitely sandalwood and different derivatives, synthetic or natural ways to get the sandalwood essence, if you wish. There is cedar. There is pine. What am I forgetting? There are not that many. I was really surprised that there are not that many. And again, once you start thinking about sustainability of like how many forests do you have to cut or what does it take to actually grow enough of the material to produce those essences that you can use in perfume making, it's a lot. So you end up with a very limited biodiversity. And you recoup that through synthetic molecules or separating natural essences and studying their individual components and figuring out how to bring them forward or isolate them and make new out of those. So wood is pretty high on the complexity list. Tobacco is even higher in the complexity. Then a massive category, fruity. Here I agree. Fruity is a deceiving category. People think, oh yeah, fruit salad, how complex can it be? There are so many. And half of florals are fruity. It's very, very rich, very vast category. Even more complex is balsamic. Hard to explain category until you actually smell it. All kinds of resinous type of materials can be there. And the top 2 by complexity, guess which ones? The top 2 is animalistic, and leather. And that's what we have from a master perfumer who pretty much shaped the way perfume schools work now. I'm sure they update their classifications with times, but this is pretty much what, what gave birth to how perfumers were taught, raised, how it worked, and how they function to this day. And to give you a little bit of an update, a somewhat more recent, but still not recent enough because things are just developing way too quickly. Perfume, The Alchemy of Scent by Jean-Claude Ellena, another, I wouldn't call him a founding father of perfumery, but it's a celebrity perfumer at this point. Just like a supermodels became the thing in the 90s, in the end of the 20th century and beginning of 21st century, we finally started seeing such phenomena as star perfumers. Francis Kurkdjian, without a doubt, is John Galliano, if you wish, of perfumery. And Jean-Claude Ellena is definitely a star perfumer. He's not just a master perfumer. He is a legend. He is a namesake brand. He every once in a while, he writes books. They are usually very small. I have a few of them. They're like very easy read. So you'll get your sense of accomplishment fairly easily. This is not a book that you can't finish. They are very cleanly, simply written. And they are written for everyday person. There are some technical details here, but nothing really that intense that you will get lost in the process. He chose to actually do even more reductionism. The world of scents and odors is expanding, and he decided to divide it into 9 categories. Let's see what we have. First, flowers. They're subdivided into 5 groups. I see. The complexity is arising already. Rose flowers, white flowers, yellow flowers, and I am currently obsessed with that category. I'll make a separate video on that. We'll talk about it in more detail. Exotic or spiced flowers, anise flowers. And as I said, anise flowers is things that are bitter and fresh, bitter, zesty. Mimosa goes here. I'm surprised he put lilac there. To me, lilac is nearly fruity. Wisteria, anisic aldehyde, or heliotropin. Okay. Then we have fruits. And fruits, as I mentioned before, include a lot of florals. Aspanthus smells like peaches. Frangipani smells like a fruit salad generally. Fruits. 3 groups in fruits. Citrus, orchard fruits, and soft fruits. And that includes actually blackcurrant. So I think that includes berries, as far as I can say. 3rd category is woods. And we include there obviously santal, vetiver. Well, vetiver is grass, but you see, he is combining things by the way we perceive them and less by the way that they grow or their color. It's becoming more and more as the time goes by, and as the world of natural and synthetic and combos of such ingredients explodes, we see the shift more and more and more toward the classifications that are based on perception and not the origin. So in the woods, we find sandal, which is a wood, patchouli, vetiver, it's a grass, but absolutely all 3 are very much commonly found in the same compositions and give us similar vibes in a way. Cedar, lichen, oak moss absolute. Okay, so you see, oak moss also in the woods. And I full-heartedly agree. I do find that Ellena's classification is, to me, the most useful in the way that the perfume world operates right now. 4th, grasses. Again, notice Michael Edwards and Jean-Claude Ellena and Edmond Roudnitska separated herbal, green, and woody as 3 different categories. Grasses, 3 groups. Green or fresh cut grass, aromatic, remember, lavender, rosemary, those things, aniseed, basil, tarragon, anise. You can throw mimosa there, just the same. But he has anise flowers as its own subcategory, so he decided to separate them a little bit aside. Next, 5th category is spices. We get cool spices. So when Jean-Claude Ellena composes, Again, he had to come up with this classification to help himself first and foremost. So he separates scents into cool spices and hot spices. Cool spices is also called black spices, and hot spices is more toward gourmand and sweet baking spices. Cool spices is pepper, cardamom, nutmeg, pink pepper. Hot spices, cinnamon, clove, pimento. Sixth category, sweet products. Here we have our gourmands. Vanillas, coumarines, musks, and the galore of synthetic molecules that give us ethyl maltol and others. This is the sixth category. Seventh category, animal products. And those don't have to be of truly animal origin, mind you. It can be all ambers. Castoreums, now, as far as I know, often plant-based or synthetic-based. Civets, catolindol. These I find animalic products are very hard to study because they stink, by definition. If you look into the history of animalic ingredients in perfumery, they are all from testicles, anal glands, we call them. What else it can be called? Digestive tract of certain animals. They have very distinct, unpleasant, disturbing, unwanted type of flavors on their own. So this is the category I imagine that would be the least pleasant to study. But oddly enough, they exist for a reason. They deepen and bring life to a lot of other compositions that otherwise seem too watercolory and too shallow almost. All right, two last categories, guess them. Our favorites, what has exploded in the last 20 years: marine products, seaweed, it's just contemporary oceanic, and cologne, it's a molecule, which is the marine oceanics of the 90s and early 2000s. Davidoff Cool Water, CK1, and yada yada. In the ninth category, minerals. He adds exactly one ingredient there, but I know for a fact it's a big world. Minerals, aldehydes. And for this alone, I love Jean-Claude Ellena. I think aldehydes truly belong to the category of mineral, industrial and contemporary mineral type of perfume making, composing of blends. Out of everything that I've read, feel free to disagree and please explain in the comments why. The auto classification that he provides is the most functional, usable, and oddly enough complete despite being very simplistic. I think it is important to get exposure to at least several competing classifications of anything, of any phenomena you're studying or industry you're in, so you can actually start seeing the unavoidable fundamental similarities that gives you an idea of, all right, some things actually don't change. Roses, jasmine, still need to know what they smell like. Things that are very complex, without a doubt, all master perfumers of different eras and the marketing mogul that pretty much set up the way that perfumes are sold to us for decades all agree that certain accords, animalistic, leather, woody, are actually way more complex than we might assume ab initio. Also, unavoidably, we're noticing the trend of shifting away from the caring about how, where, what was produced and made and where it came from, toward that intermediate layer of our olfaction bulb of perception. You can see it everywhere. You can see it in the eye, you can see it in robotics. Mark my word, the word perception is the word of the year and probably the next 3 years. Trying to understand not necessarily how things are, but what are the maps and ontologies of how we perceive them. It becomes way more important for decision making than the analogs of where they came from, because apparently We live in the era where what things are and where they came from. Synthetic in silico becomes indistinguishable from natural. And sometimes with all our desire to be green and natural and holistic, we can destroy nature by doing so blindly. As I said, natural essences are the least eco-friendly way to make perfume ingredients. It is very, very nested and very interestingly evolving world there on the ground. And it's becoming more complex. There are more options, more molecules, more ways to combine them, more things from where sensation can come from. And yet, the most functional descriptors are still going to be much lower dimensionality and much more simple. And they're going to be, and it's going to be more and more critical for us to align our systems of perception so we can share the same language. And development of such language, in my view, is first and foremost is in the perfume community online, is in the people who review perfumes, post perfumes, buy perfumes, love perfumes, hate perfumes, don't wear perfumes, wear perfumes. It's the community of people who consider this to be a life interest of theirs, including perfume bloggers, perfume evaluators, and marketers as well. There is a fair criticism that comes my way when I talk about it, that you know what, you either like it or you're not. Like, I don't need to know all of these 50 categories and know what fougère or Chypre is in order to know if I find a perfume sexy. Fair. You can say the same about food. However, you learn very quickly when you get out of your 20s into your 30s and 40s that what can taste yummy sometimes can really, really be bad for your health and might not even feel that yummy when it goes through your body. There are so many ways in the way that we can get cheated through smell. By the way, 70% of any food is us smelling it. So being cheated through not identifiable origins and the true nature of things that we consume, either through sniffing, eating, drinking, seeing, hearing, still will need decoding. It will still need some form of a language. What do you think about perfume classifications? Do you care? Do you not care? Have you tried a nose training protocol similar to what Edmond Roudnitska or Jean-Claude Ellena or other webinars, perfume schools, bloggers such as me and others have suggested? Has it worked for you? Has it not? Have you noticed any type of oversensitivity to a specific family of scents, or maybe lack anosmia to certain components? How do you deal with that? And what do you think about this notion of perception? And again, perception can only be functional if it has its own language, if it can be expressed in some way so you can make decisions. What are your thoughts on that? Super curious to hear. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're listening or watching one of the podcast streaming platforms, I also encourage you to visit my YouTube channel, which has about 5x more diversity of content than just the Perfume Nation podcast. Otherwise, can't wait to see your comments, and I'll see you in the next one.